Like he would, yeah, he would be in the pizza himself. He would be.
When he was in Korea.
And now you have. I have as well. I just detest the idea of having a regular.
Hi, my name is Sarah. I know Hugh through Julie. And one of my last fantastic memories of Hugh is for a wedding present. Julie and Hugh allowed Floss, my husband, and I to stay on Shanty. And they met us in the sailing club, and it was a dancing evening. Now, I'd only just got married, and my husband didn't dance at all when we got married, but he danced with Hugh, and Hugh was the one who got him up on the dance floor, and we had a fantastic evening dancing.
You don't have to
thank
be
you.
on Facebook.
We used to see them a lot in the early days when we were there, not so much when they were doing up their place here. But of late, especially last winter, I really remember passing by Hugh numerous occasions in the middle of winter, in the depths of winter, and he had it in his mind to got to fix his front door. He had a stable door sort of thing on his houseboat, and it's a bit warped, wasn't sealed properly. The rain had come in, the wind had come in, and he must have spent the best part of the whole winter working at it, sleeping in the cold as well. But by the spring, he had cracked it. He had a nice barn door that wasn't warped, didn't let in the rain and didn't let in the wind, and I think he was well chuffed with that, and just shows the man's perseverance and patience, I think. Anyway, he was a great man, and he'll be sadly missed.
Hello, I've written a poem for Hugh called Soul Man, because I looked up the name Hugh and it said he was a man of intelligence, integrity and soul. Soul Man. Daisy chain man, serenely restless, cunningly observant, obtusely witty, strides, check blue upright, understanding the need for margin when margin is not needed. Plaid piper man, cat magnet, children charmer, ocean calm, methodical in challenge, eternally seeking kind words, never mincing them, always casseroling them in a broth of soothing soup. Canal knower man, imaginer of platforms of beauty, broken heart mender, not in May mower of lawns, painter of sheds, lover of Frank Zappa, shy wearer of t-shirt when only a checked one will do. Angels snore like Hugh, with loud bear-like softening. He purred, he purrs, up there with them. They feed him beer and biscuits in heavenly Mr. Shah's. And this is from me, Caroline, his favourite landlady, June 11th, 2023.
Hello everybody, I'm Alan, a neighbour of Hugh and Julie's. We only knew Hugh as a neighbour. What we've heard today, he was an incredible architect, a mentor, and as we all know, a wonderful person. On Hugh's 70th birthday, on his decking, he was going to have a cover for a band, and he wanted to make this cover out of white pipework and a tarpaulin. So I asked him if he wanted some help, and he said yes, I would. And so when I went round there, he'd created this incredible structure out of pipework. And he said, I said, why don't you tape the joints, Hugh? And he said, no, it'll be fine. Once the tarpaulin's round it, the weight will keep it together. On the second session we had, I came round, Julie's hanging out of an upstairs bedroom, hanging off a bit of rope. The next door neighbour was hanging off a bit of rope into number 8's garden. And of course, as one pulled, the other one let go, and the whole thing kept falling apart. So I said, Hugh, you've got to tape it. And he said, no, it will work. And after 2 sessions, I'm afraid I had to abandon him a little, because it just wasn't working. And it did fall apart. But we only knew him as a neighbour. Today we have learnt something new about Hugh, and what an incredible man he was. We always knew he was very intelligent, but how highly respected he's been amongst the architectural fraternity, and genuinely a lovely man. Thank you very much.
Once upon a time, I was happily living in London as a quantity surveyor, and somehow or other I landed up in the Sudan with Hugh, with a bunch of architects out there, and I spent all my time in the UK as a professional QS, siding with engineers against architects who somehow or other wanted to have airy-fairy ideas and bring some elegance into things. And I found myself sharing an office with a bunch of architects, and Hugh came and joined us. And he helped with the rest of the architects bring a touch of style to the place while we had all these engineers running around digging canals and doing all sorts of things. And Hugh just came and became part of the organisation out there. And he was quiet and modest, but there was more to him than you ever knew about. He would occasionally talk about his sailing, but he'd never boast about it. He'd just tell you about it. And I know he was on the Fastnet race, and he once admitted that he'd been talking about it, and he once admitted it's one of the few times he'd actually been nervous, bordering on a bit more than nervous during that race. And we spent time together, and a folk group started up, and Hugh somehow or other one night was persuaded to play his harmonica, and he was an absolutely superb blues harmonica player, and you had to work really hard to get him to play, and it was quite difficult to do, but he was such a load of fun, and he was so good to be with, and he made a major contribution to the team. While we were there, a bunch of them started a sailing pursuit, which they built some miracle dinghies. And they built 6 of these things, and they formed the White Nile Sailing Club, which is a very, very restricted number of people. And they once sailed from up to Khartoum, along the Blue, and then back down to Senna, and then across by road back to Kanana. But they did all that as a huge adventure, and Hugh was part of it. His modesty came through. One of the things he didn't say, and was not mentioned earlier on this afternoon, was that he was a welder. And he was one of the few people on a ship that was travelling up towards Yokohama, and he managed to weld something that had finally broken, and he actually managed to get the ship into port, and he was thanked profusely by the captain and the company of the ship. And the rest of that story is perhaps for another day. And I'll finish just with one thing, was it typical Hugh, and it's a geography lesson for anybody listening to this. We'd gone on an expedition out with about half a dozen 4-wheel drive vehicles through the Bundu, miles from anywhere, and we'd stopped at one point. We were in a mixture of sand and desert and scrub and goodness knows what, and it was a bit flat where we were, and we'd stopped. We were putting fuel back in the vehicles and talking about this, that and the other, and having a drink. And Hugh turned round to us and said, this is Mamba country. We all went, what? There are no snakes anywhere near this, and certainly not Mambas. No, he said, Mamba country. We said, what do you mean? He said, miles and miles of bloody Africa. Hugh, you'll be sincerely missed.
Is that loud enough? Just to say, Claire and I want to wish you all the very best. We met Hugh and Julie some years ago where we live at Birdham. Our field abuts their shanty houseboat that they have on the canal. We're about 100 metres away from them, and we took them out sailing once in our 1930s gaff cutter, and I didn't realise Hugh was a sailor at that time. And he said, "Oh, I'll get the rope." So he jumped off onto the pontoon, and of course, it was like a diving board. Went up and down, and he fell in the water. So we had to fish him out. But we've had great times together for many years, and I came to have lunch with him one day when he was doing some work in the attic. Julie was away. She wanted me to just check on him, make sure he was all right. And we talked about the work he did, which I had no idea until just recently how much of an innovative designer he was. I'm an architect, but very different type of work, in conservation work. And I still push a pencil, but he obviously hadn't used a pencil for drawing for a long time in the way that he had done his work. But both Claire and I, and Claire's going to come and join me now, have had some great times with them both.
Yeah, we loved you, Hugh.
Yeah, and we hope Julie will continue coming down to Shanty,
Yeah,
which Hugh made for her.
and we'll have some fun together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, lots of love.
Yeah, bye.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name's John Queening. Hi. Like all good wakes, I want to share a few memories of Hugh from my time meeting him, to celebrate his life and the impact he had on me, which was many. I'm going to start first with how I first met Hugh, and then some memories from our time in Kanana in the 1970s, and finally the story of a big adventure we had, a 500-mile dinghy trip sailing down the Nile, something never to be forgotten, certainly for me. That's the map of where we went, which you can look at later. I first met Hugh working on the Kanana Sugar Project in 1976, and 46 years ago. We were living about 200 miles south of Khartoum, along the White Nile, along with a bunch of other expatriates and Sudanese. Some of them are here today. That's the expatriates. He was building township housing and I was building irrigation infrastructure, water pumping stations and canals. Hugh and I shared a house after mine burnt down, but that's another story. We were 4 bachelors: Hugh, Ben Hallam of Ben's Bar fame, Fred Lovell and me. What's my memories of Hugh in Kanana? Tall, handsome, laid back, patient, but very determined. Always up for a challenge. He'd already done some amazing things before I knew him. Julie mentioned some of these. He visited Japan as a student, he retrofitted a remote cottage in Wales, sailed in a yacht race across the Atlantic, played drums in a blues band, but he was a modest and unassuming man. Good company and someone to have around when the going got tough, as I found out. Some Kanana memories of Hugh. He was a squash player. He thumped the ball as hard as he could, anywhere. He was a wild and dangerous player. You might get accidentally hit by his racket. He was a musician, a rock drummer, and played some amazing blues on a small harmonica. Trains are coming, trains are coming, trains are coming. It was one of the songs I remember. A Robert Johnson fan. He introduced me to him. He was also a jebel hunter, driving out in the Sudanese desert, finding large outcrops of rock, climbing them, exploring. Really good. And then one Eid holiday, we had this amazing desert trip to the Nuba Mountains. It was in the March 1977 Eid holiday. Hugh, myself, Ray Clements and Fred Lovell did a desert road trip of about 900 miles over 4 days. In 2 Toyota trucks, pickup trucks, we drove west deep into the southern Kordofan area looking for the Nuba Mountains. Tall, dark and imperious, the Nuba were made famous by Leni Riefenstahl, the German filmmaker and photographer whose Nazi propaganda films of the Nuremberg Malleys made her famous. She lived with the Nuba in the 1960s and wrote books about them. We wanted to find out a little more about them. We took with us 2 Toyota pickup trucks, 2 44 gallons of petrol, tinned food, a barrel of water, some camping gear, and we slept rough underneath the stars. The desert terrain was rough and mountainous, particularly when we got near the Numa Mountains and the trucks took a beating on the rough tracks. We did a big loop around El Obeid, but eventually got turned back by the army. Even then it was dangerous country. Kordofan is next to Darfur, which has been in the news recently as the home of the Janjaweed raiders. On the way back, racing across the desert flats, my truck hit a pothole, breaking the gearbox. Hugh then towed my truck 200 miles back to camp. Another time he rescued me. Well, the lovely Julie. Well, Julie arrived on site after Hugh's holiday and just stayed. I didn't know her well then, but got to know her through meeting up in the years after Sudan. Vivacious, dynamic, warm, down to earth, a real northern lass. We used to say that Julie was the best thing that happened to Hugh. Somebody else said that today. And lastly, dinghy sailing. Sailing was one of Hugh's many talents. He learned young. His father owned a racing yacht in Cape Town, South Africa. He'd done the Cape Town to Rio Atlantic race, and he was later, as we heard today, sailing in the Fastnet race when several yachts sank and several people were drowned. From dinghies to ocean-going yachts, Hugh could sail anything, anywhere, which leads me on to our Nile trip. But first, why did we have dinghies in Kanana? Well, for want of a hobby, Dave Jessup and I brought out 6-number dinghy kits to Sudan in late 1976. The miracles were what we got, 12 foot long. The kits were plywood sheets stitched together with copper wire and seamed with fiberglass. We each kept one and we sold the other 4. Hugh bought one and built it in his bedroom. He called it Uhuru, freedom in Swahili. It was the lightest and the fastest of our fleet on the Nile, particularly in light winds. I never saw him capsize, and I went over many times. The Nile trip. In late 1977, about a couple of months before I actually left Sudan and went back, there was a 7-day Eid holiday break coming up. Hugh plotted another trip, this time by dinghy. He was the captain and I was the first mate. Captain Hugh said, "We'll drive across to Sennar, sail down the Blue Nile to Khartoum, then back up the White Nile to Kanana. Easy." Nothing to worry about, I thought. Only crocodiles, bilharzia, cataracts, floating water hyacinths, and absolutely no support or backup to help us for this 500-mile round trip. Meticulous preparations were made. A homemade spinnaker sewn up. Sails made from sheets to go over the boom for goose winging the sails. Essential items were collected. A bag of tinned food, containers of water, a large bottle of gin, of course, and a bag of fresh limes to go with them. We were ready to go. On the Friday start to the Eid holiday, Bill and Gwen Scriven drove us on the dinghy Uhuru, the 80-mile leg from Kannar to Sennar on the Blue Nile. Late Friday afternoon, we launched the dinghy Uhuru and were on our way. 8 days later, we arrived back in Kanana with a story to tell. Sailing 15 to 20 hours each day, we spent the first 4 days beating up the Blue Nile against the wind, but the fast-moving current carrying us along. Required endless tacking. We covered 230 miles. It was physically hard work, requiring all Hugh's concentration and skill to keep us on a tight course. Bank to bank we would go to maximise sailing the long reaches, seeing villages on both sides of the Blue Nile with people waving at us. On the 4th day, Tuesday late evening, we finally sailed into Khartoum Sailing Club, moored up and went off to the newly opened Hilton Hotel. Entering this world of luxury in our dirty clothes, nearly midnight, we booked ourselves a room, had a hot shower, a slap-up meal, then crashed out on a luxury double bed. We set off on the Wednesday morning, the following day, the 5th day, after a good cooked breakfast, English style. we sailed round to Onderman and up the White Nile. This time the wind was behind us, but we were against the current, but it was slow moving and sluggish, as is the White Nile. By goose winging the sails, that's putting one out to the one side and one out to the other, we were able to, and hoisting the spinnaker, and also having to shelter from the intense heat, 35 degrees plus. We covered the 200 miles to Kanana in 3.5 days. We had to port the dinghy around the cataracts on the Nile. We managed to find some porters, hired porters, to carry the boat round. And then we had to paddle and push our way through floating islands of water hyacinth at the Jebel Aulia Dam. Once we got through that, we were flying. We were running fast before the wind, the sails billowing on the long reaches north with the wind behind us, where the Nile was over a mile wide. On Saturday the 8th day, after passing the lights of Costi twinkling in the dark, we arrived at Kanana, but much later in the evening than we planned. Fortunately, David Jessup turned up in the darkness. We'd planned with him much earlier, but he did come back to look for us. He knew we'd get there. We hailed each other, stashed the dinghy near the main canal, and then David drove us back the 10 miles to the camp, where we collapsed in our beds. We'd done it, a magical trip. What are my memories of that trip? Well, floating along with the rippling water noises from the boat, sharing gin and limes between us in a tin cup, groups of young children cheering us on the bank when we came close, stopping at a Sudanese village and eating a freshly roasted fish at a local restaurant, sleeping overnight underneath the stars on an island in the middle of the Nile. Hugh sailing in the moonlight. He was much better at keeping awake than me. I was always nodding off. A magical trip. And whilst I took loads of photographs, which I sent back to England for developing, they went missing in the post. So all we had was our memories on this map. Since then, Hugh and I have kept in touch over the 46 years since our trip, mainly through the lovely Julie's efforts at Kanana reunions or when they came north, as Julie's mother and sister, Vanda, lived not far from us. We both had our careers, got married, had children and grandchildren, but as we were living at other ends of the country, I was up in Yorkshire, we saw each other sparingly. But like the saying goes, old friends are like stars. You don't always see them, but you know they're always there. When we did meet up, it was easy to pick up our old friendship. At his 70th birthday party here in Clanfield, I gave him a framed copy of this map, similar to this, as a memento of our Nile trip. I had it drawn back in England in 1978, just after I got back. To Captain Hugh, from his friend, first mate, John Q. He was a lovely man, somebody I liked and admired, and who has lived a very full life. He still had a very full head of hair, so I was insanely jealous. Despite being missed by all of us, I'm sure we all have some great memories of our times with him. I certainly do. So here's to Hugh, wherever you are. Thank you for listening.
Hugh Whitehead, who was a work-obsessed madman who would do nothing except work. So this previous incarnation of Hugh struck me as very bizarre, because I started working with him back in '86 when we had the best new computers in the universe, and I did 2D drafting and he did 3D modeling. Sod Hugh, very annoying. So between us we ended up traveling a lot to Huntsville in Alabama, looking at the Saturn spaceship, having all sorts of things together like that. And whenever anything turned up in the office, he would generally grab the job. So when occasionally I managed to grab something from him, I was very pleased. So I grabbed the Waterloo station, and he grabbed every other job there was. And then back in '91, the place collapsed, And we went on to do other things. I went on to KPF, he went on to CADventure, and he did a lot of fantastic stuff there. And then once he got into Foster's, we started to see each other again quite a lot. And I remember particularly a trip in a cab, me and Jay and Hugh, and we'd just been to a presentation where somebody had been doing some fantastic rendering. And Hugh said, having spent the last 10 years doing rendering, that was crap. That's not interesting. What is interesting is actually what lies behind the rendering, which is essentially the geometry of the object that you are looking at. And the complexity of architectural geometry is what really drove him. So when he was back at Foster's, then we had a lot of conversations about that. So I remember him having lunch with him and him describing a very curvy building that he was designing and helping him out with ideas about how the curvature could be described. Turned out to be the gherkin, of course. And
My own. So, yeah, I'm John. I knew Hugh for years and years. We met shortly after we both came out of uni back in the we met in the late 70s. We worked in a small architectural practice together and quickly hit it off. Mutual liking for a bit of a laugh and having a bit of fun about things. One of the things I remember about Hugh very early on is his casual dress sense. He was casual pretty much about everything. I think he came from the sort of Soddet school of fashion. We realized pretty early on that we both had a mutual interest in music. So this resulted in us going out and doing a lot of music venues. The London music scene at the time was very, very vibrant. So we would typically go out and listen to some blues, a lot of rock music in venues around South London especially. But we would drink rather a lot. And it was in the days really before the drink driving laws were properly enforced, shall we say, and we had a bit of a casual disregard for them anyway. So things would happen like we would either lose the car or we would forget that we had a car, or as happened on one occasion, we were so hammered that we couldn't figure out basically how to operate the thing. So we spent a bit of time looking at it and seeing what we should do. Who was the more sober? Who was the most capable, least capable? So we thought that perhaps we might, one of us might operate the pedals and the other might use the steering wheel. So in his effort to explain how this might work, Hugh said, and I'll never forget it, "Why don't you knive and I'll dravigate?" So whether we did or not, I really don't know, but that was my memory of my dear old pal, and I will miss him very much.
Hey Jules, Zand, Al, whoever it is that's watching this, maybe one of the grandkids. It's hard to know what to say because Hugo spanned my entire life so far, and what an amazing human being he is, and such a lovely, just full-hearted, steady, graceful, funny godfather. And so blessed that we have Hugo and Julie as godparents. Like, you both have been so incredibly steady and bright throughout our lives. You know, how life goes, has its ups and downs. You've always been there emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually. Yeah, it's been an incredible just privilege and joy. And yeah, it's impossible to think of just one time. There's so many times, there's like a myriad of times that are just constantly with me when I think about Hugo, and I think about you both and the whole family all together. But yeah, times at the caravan, Carver Road, Tineraru, Arudimal, the beach, definitely the beach. And Hugo at sundown whipping out his harmonica, Canon John Smith's Sundowner, after we've been in the waves. If we're lucky, maybe a fire, but definitely stars. And there he is with the stars, always will be. So thank you, Hugh. Thank you, Jules. Yeah, you're always there. Big love. So I just realised what it was I needed to share. So the day after you passed, Hugh, I was in the park in Bristol with my friend who I'd not seen for years and years. And you actually met at Mum's funeral. And he remembers you. And strangely enough, he was telling me that he was going to go to a gig on my birthday. The Four Owls were playing in Bristol. And I had to tell him about the connection, about Xander and Elle, and about how they are your sons, and you were just very, very present in that moment. And I looked up, and when Mum passed away, we just kept on seeing these little rainbows, these kind of like dog rainbows in the sky, you know, when
there's too many things to say. We love you, Hugo, so much. You've been such, well, you are still such a part of my life and always will be, like Mum is. And hello, little ones. I was just thinking about the last time I saw you here in Barnfield, and I was looking at your records admirably, and you said you just got a new needle, so we tried out your sound system and played it really loud. We're listening to Grateful Dead and dancing around like maniacs in your music room, and that was really fun, and it reminded me of Mum a lot. I think you and Mum have a similar fun, crazy energy that comes out, and I remember I come down before going to bed or wake up in the middle of the night, and you and Mum would be there listening to music and maybe having a joint by the fire. And yeah, spent so much time on the beach and so many memories. It's difficult to put them all into words, but you're very present, and I feel like I learnt a lot being with you. I think my whole life people have told me that I'm quiet, but I've learnt that I'm quite a good listener. And I think you are a very quiet and gentle presence, and I always respected that. I was like, well, Hugo can be quiet, I can be quiet, it's cool. But yeah, love you so much, and yeah, you'll be really missed, but you'll be with us, I know. And yeah. Mwah.
I've spent a lot of time of my life with Julie and Hugo and Xander and Elle. Hugo is such a huge, important part to me because of his he's my godfather, and he's always been there. And I've got lots of stories, and I'll stick with two. One very quickly. The lady, the celebrant, mentioned he got evicted from America, but what she didn't mention, that he informed me that when he was hitchhiking in America with no money, he got taken to see the judge, and then the judge said, you have to voluntarily evict yourself from America, and he said, sure. I was heading to the airport as you busted me. And he says, well, go and evict yourself then. But Hugo said, I've got no money. So the judge had to ask the policeman to take him back to the highway to continue hitching. So the policeman took him back to the highway for hitching, and then as the policeman drove off, another policeman came up and booked him for hitching again, at which point the first policeman had to come back very quickly to tell the second policeman not to book him because he's just done that once already at the judge's behest. So I thought that was very funny. And then a personal story with me, we went on many holidays together, and he in France, he loved his dad's jokes, and one of the dad's jokes was, Toby, this one is paid a load. I didn't pay a load for it, did I? And it was like, oh Hugh, one of your jokes. And he did it with such a smile and happiness. It was just wonderful. And yeah, that smile and happiness will live long in the memory. So, yeah.
Ready? Say I love you, Grandad.
I love you, Granddad.
You want to say it to the camera?
I love you, Granddad.
And what did Grandad do with you in Portugal?
Making me a mud kitchen.
He made you a mud kitchen, didn't he?
Yeah.
And what else did he do with you?
Teach me.
You did lots of digging, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember when we got our first dog, Sheba?
Yeah.
And Grandad named Sheba, didn't he?
Yeah.
And we were in the garden.
Yeah.
And Sheba was digging holes and you were playing with Grandad.
Yeah.
That was really fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we went on some nice walks to the eucalyptus forest, didn't we?
Dad, I just need to reverse.
You can hear reverse.
I need
Alright,
to
do you want to say
reverse.
bye-bye, Grandad?
Bye-bye, Granddad.
We heard all about you when you was in your mummy's tummy. We did. And your granddad was telling us all about it. He said, come over. Yeah, he did.
Is that good? Yeah, just wanted to say, I enjoyed the celebration of my dad's life today. And it's amazing to be here in Barnfield that he created. And I know he did it, for the grandchildren, for the next generation, for the futures. So it's lovely to spend that with the family. And when I was growing up, I didn't really quite realise his geniusness until later on. But he used to, make skate ramps for us, or go-karts out of a pram, or my first guitar, which is really cool. And he could do that really well, but little did I know he could also design stadiums and landmarks in London all at the same time.
Yeah.
And just with the music as well, and I definitely felt his love growing up, and it was really nice that he supported me in everything that I did, and that made a really big difference. It's just, we've had a lot of beautiful family moments together, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. It's been wonderful having him as my father-in-law and granddad to Caspian and Sky.
Yeah.
I think the word that came to my mind was grateful.
Yeah.
That's our experience of you as being your father, and because I lost my father, and so he filled that void for me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was really nice. Just like one big family.
Yeah, and so welcoming and accepting.
Yeah.
And like the last time we spent together, it was in Portugal. Julie and Hugh came to stay with us. stay with me and look after me when I was pregnant with Sky and Caspian. And yeah, just his like unrivaled kind of patience and determination, and he helped so much on the farm, and you know, really did everything that you do normally, and carried all the wood and built our wardrobes, and you know, it was just every day was just so helpful and patient and kind, and
he was really gentle and calm, and if you had something that you wanted to talk about or there's something that you wanted to learn about, he'd always be willing to take the time, and he'd always be there. So like real determination and a meticulous perfectionist. Yeah, and it's a shame you won't get to meet little Sky, but it's nice that hopefully we can still enjoy Barnfield with my mum for many years.
And we've got so many happy memories all together. We have had so many wonderful family experiences.
Yeah.
So I feel grateful that we've had that time together, and that we've got to spend it with him.
Yeah, definitely. And look forward to lots more family times.
Yeah.
Lots of love.
Lots of love.